Notorious shortseller Jim Chanos and fund manager Ross Gerber debated the bull and bear case for Tesla on the Wall Street Journal just days ago. Now, what's interesting is that Jim Chanos has had some major short seller wins in the past, such as betting against companies like Enron, which netted him $500 million in profit. And he even teaches a class about his short spotting methodologies. Ross Gerber, who is one of Tesla's most vocal supporters, agrees that Chanos has indeed shorted some amazingly bad companies. And we've spoken before on this channel in previous videos that Chanos' methodology actually makes a lot of sense. And during this debate, Ross Gerber says that he totally sees eye to eye with Chanos on these other companies that he shorted. What doesn't seem to make sense is what Jim Chanos sees in Tesla. And Ross Gerber calls him out on this, saying that Jim Chanos' emotions about Elon Musk are getting in the way of his fundamental skill. That's a very powerful statement, especially since later on in the interview, Ross says that look, Chanos has already won. The stock is down huge, declining around 70% in the past year. But for some reason, Jim Chanos isn't accepting that as a win and doesn't seem to be giving up on his short position so quickly. Even after this massive win, he's dug in his heels and is continuing with his short thesis, still seeing even more downside in Tesla. Chanos appears to be unfazed by the stock's small rebound off a rough start in 2023. And before we continue, stop using Yahoo Finance, stop using Google Finance, and have a look at our website, themarketisopen.com, where we have instant stock quotes and a brand new set of financial data going back 15 years, and it's all freely available. One of the biggest issues that Jim Chanos has with Tesla, that he believes is overlooked by Wall Street, is Tesla's exposure to China. He says that the majority of Tesla's production comes from Tesla's China factory. Now, he's correct about this. The Shanghai factory produces more vehicles currently than all of Tesla's other 3 factories combined. Now, to be fair, Giga Texas and Giga Berlin have just begun their ramp-ups within the last 9 months or so and are still producing just a fraction of their intended capacity. But Tesla's exposure to China doesn't feel overlooked, since this has been mentioned multiple times in the past, and we've talked about it before in other videos. Ross Gerber approaches this in 2 interesting ways. The first is that he believes the China economy previously had poor rules, especially related to COVID, that were hurting the economy, and they've backtracked on these rules, which could lead to a major economic recovery later on this year, something that would be extremely positive for Tesla and for the demand of their vehicles. The second point that Ross brings up, which may address Jim Chanos' concerns more specifically, is that there are numerous companies from all around the world that have operations within China, and many of those operations are far more profitable than the corresponding US ones. For instance, Disney, which has a massive park in China that's larger than its US counterpart. Or Apple, which derives virtually all of its hardware profits and revenue from China, since that's where all of their devices are manufactured. It's also important to note that Tesla's Giga Shanghai factory is fully owned by Tesla, whereas other automakers such as General Motors or Volkswagen have had to partner with Chinese companies in order to build joint ventures in China. And within those joint ventures, the Chinese company is typically the majority owner. So GM actually owns less than 50% of its joint venture with SAIC in China, giving the Chinese company control over these operations. So if anything, there's far more risk at these other companies, and at the same time, much more at stake for the United States than just Tesla being located in China. And China also relies on the US for many things as well, so business in each country is very intertwined. China is the largest car market in the world, so it's clearly important for auto companies to have exposure there, and if anything, Tesla is better positioned owning its entire factory. In terms of sales, if Jim Chanos is worried about Tesla in China, he should be just as worried about, say, Volkswagen, which derives about 37% of its new car sales from China and has 40 manufacturing plants in the country. Tesla has 1. So this seems like more of a government-level concern to make sure that US companies are being treated fairly in China, since it affects all companies, not just Tesla. Now, the Wall Street Journal interviewer brings up this point once again that we've put to rest maybe 100 times already, of whether or not Tesla is a car company or a tech company. Jim Chanos immediately says that it's a car company, and Ross Gerber says it's a technology company. Now, this is a silly argument in the first place because it doesn't matter when looking at valuation. The important thing is the growth rate. Tesla has already seen massive growth, and it's expected to continue as electric vehicles continue to gain market share of new car sales over the next decade or so to eclipse the internal combustion engine, whereas traditional car companies are invested in ICE vehicles, which are the things getting displaced. So they get lower price to earnings multiples because they're expected to have declining sales and earnings in the future, whereas Tesla should trade at a higher PE ratio to reflect its huge growth rate. This is contrary to what Jim Chanos says, as he believes Tesla's margins will match that of traditional automakers, and therefore the PE ratio should fall to 5 or 6 times earnings instead of 25 to 30 times. But again, the growth rate should be the difference here. If you look at Tesla as a car company, you may miss why Tesla's growth rate could be much better than a traditional automaker. So let's perhaps look at this in a different way, in that all companies are technology companies. If we look at some definitions of what exactly technology means, the dictionary describes it as the application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes, especially in industry, or machinery and equipment developed from the application of scientific knowledge. So it seems like virtually any type of scientific process can be considered technology. Now, Wall Street has specific classifications of companies. Some are tech, biotech, consumer goods, utilities, etc. But some form of technology likely exists in any company that is capable of delivering some specific good or service to its customers. For instance, is Boeing a plane company or a technology company? Well, it requires an enormous amount of technology to make planes, whether it's hardware or software, logistics, simple just know-how or experience from their specific industry. Not just anyone can compete with Boeing, even if they had the money, because they would lack the years of infrastructure build-out and refinement of their science and engineering platforms. When Henry Ford originally applied the assembly line to the building of Ford vehicles, that was a new type of technology that enabled faster production and therefore lower costs and higher volumes, allowing it to scale and take out competitors. Today, Ford and GM or Toyota have to be technology companies to produce cars. And we've seen in the past that Toyota was able to take on major car companies because they had better technology or better processes to make cars more affordable and more reliable, etc., which ultimately delivered a better product and experience for the customer. So even a car from the 1900s with no software in it still has plenty of technology in mechanical form. But Apple founder Steve Jobs spoke of this article he once saw in Scientific American, where they were comparing the efficiencies of various traveling animals and machines, and the humans ranked extremely poor on the list. However, a human on a bicycle blew everything away, and he realized that humans were tool builders, and he believed that the computer would be a bicycle for the mind. And indeed, the computer has so far proven that, allowing humans to amplify their abilities in speed, precision, scale, reach, etc. And so computers are just another critical tool or piece of technology for any company today. And so if all car companies are technology companies, which of them has the most advanced technology that allows them to scale the most efficient, affordable, and best user experience-based vehicles in a world that's shifting to electric motors? Jim Chanos also makes this comment that a reduction in earnings is bad for any technology company, and indeed Tesla has taken a hit. But I would argue that today's earnings aren't as important for tech companies since massive growth will lead to much higher future earnings. On the other hand, if General Motors is viewed as a technology company and its sales are in decline, that's one of the worst signs for a tech company since it signals that disruption is occurring, which historically has been nearly impossible to recover from. Now, going back to the interview debate, Jim Chanos considers Apple to be a technology company, but Tesla not to be one. And Ross Gerber keeps saying that how can that be? They're the exact same. And Chanos won't call Apple a phone company and says that most of their revenues come from systems and software, which isn't exactly true, by the way. Over half of Apple's revenue comes from just the iPhone hardware sales. But this makes little sense anyway, since at their core, they're both software companies that happen to have hardware and products. Both companies make their own operating systems, design their own chips, create the user interfaces for customers, connect each of their devices seamlessly together. If anything, Tesla is more of a technology company than Apple since they own the technology for the actual factory that builds their products, whereas Apple outsources that. While Tesla makes physical cars that run on modern software, the entire car itself is first constructed in software. Not only that, but the Gigafactory that makes the car is entirely made in software as well. And so is every machine or robot within the factory. The vehicles, chargers, power walls, megapacks all communicate to Tesla's servers using specialized software that can get over-the-air software updates to improve over time. The tools that the employees use to communicate with each other to quickly debug issues is also based in software. Ross Gerber even says that the first thing you see when you walk into a Tesla factory isn't cars or robots, it's people on computers. And so you can call Tesla whatever you want, but to me, calling it a car company seems like a pretty big oversight by ignoring perhaps 90% of what's really going on here. Jim Chanos is focused on China, on margins, on the financials, but technology is the thing that enables the quality of the product, the experience, the ability to scale, and the cost. Without looking at technology, you would say that the iPhone and a flip phone are the same because they're both phones. The other shocking thing is that throughout the interview, Jim Chanos reveals that he never really used any of Tesla's products before, whereas Ross Gerber is an avid user of the vehicles and the software. Even if you yourself don't like the product, it's important to do this type of due diligence and at least try to see why there's such an appeal for other consumers, especially if you have a massive short position against the company and you don't understand how it works. Now, Jim Chanos believes that Teslas were luxury-priced vehicles, at least prior to the recent price cuts. The average price of a car in the US hit $49,500. So now, especially with the new tax credits, the price of a Tesla is far below average, which would seem to mark an inflection point that allows Tesla to break out of this luxury price space, while competitors are still forced to raise prices on their own cars or remove critical parts. Ross Gerber also points out that more governments around the world are all incentivizing EVs, so why bet against governments? Gerber goes on to say that there are so many other crappy companies out there that exist, why choose Tesla to bet against, especially when it's run by Elon Musk, who Ross says he's the most hardworking, most dedicated person who can execute. He's a monster and he's unstoppable. Why would you bet against this? But Jim Chanos seems to care more about the details within the financials. He goes on to say that Tesla's trailing earnings, which is a snapshot of the past, when he takes out any credits, which people thought would go away and yet Tesla is still receiving them, but he says Tesla's earnings were just $2.50 per share. And he says next year's have come down from $6 to $4.50, which Chanos argues would cause the stock to re-rate, and Ross says that it has after this huge drop. But what's interesting is that even using Jim Chanos' numbers, that would mean Tesla is still growing earnings at 80%, so a PE ratio of 30 times quickly becomes too low with that kind of growth rate. I also think that in addition to what I said earlier about short-term earnings not being as important as people think due to high growth rates, one of the advantages of companies that have strong leadership is that they're willing to push Wall Street aside, temporarily or for multiple years, to focus on the real long-term business opportunities, which I discussed more in my last video. We're sacrificing some profits in exchange for higher spending or investments or to put pressure on competitors can drastically change the industry dynamics, perhaps by vastly increasing market share, such that a few years down the road, profits could end up being much, much higher than they would have ever been if no action was taken. A recession or difficult economic environment is also an amazing opportunity to disrupt and shake up the landscape by making bold moves while everyone is in chaos, in order to come out of it stronger than ever, while competitors have all pulled back on their own investments. Now, some final interesting points are that Jim Chanos says that he's not as negative as everyone else on the Twitter deal, surprisingly. It seems like the Tesla bulls are the ones most worried about Tesla's brand damage, but strangely, Chanos doesn't seem to care about this. This concept of brand damage may be something that the mainstream media made up, since Chanos disproved it by saying that there were earlier signs of higher inventories at Tesla from before Elon Musk even started with Twitter. But Chanos does make a statement that refreshing cars and bringing out new models every 5 to 6 years is a law within the auto industry, and the Model S and Model X specifically have been out for a long time and are due for a refresh. And Ross replies that this is why Cybertruck is so important, to open up a new category, and he says the competitors are still behind, but not too far behind anymore. I would disagree with this. Tesla has refreshed the Model S and X with the Plaid version, which put them much further ahead, and then they decided to cut prices even further. So I'm not sure what he's talking about. Just because a vehicle has the same name as it did a few years ago doesn't mean it's the same car. The Toyota Corolla is now 57 years old and arguably hasn't had a refresh in 57 years, but also no one has asked for one. Tesla's vehicles are upgraded constantly, and they have also been very deliberately refreshed. Model 3, for instance, has only existed for 5 years, and the current models are far superior than the original ones. For me, the biggest thing that stood out in this interview is that Jim Chanos has little knowledge about the actual technology and products that Tesla is shipping. He doesn't even know that the vehicles have been refreshed. And so, what stood out to you in this interview, and were there any valid concerns that Jim Chanos or even Ross Gerber brought up throughout this interview? Don't forget to watch my last video on Elon's strategy with Tesla's price cuts. Please hit the like button and subscribe, we would really appreciate that. And a huge shout out to all of our patrons that help to support our channel. Your support helps us to continue to make great content. Thank you guys so much for watching.